Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel, and this is another video in my underplayed, underwhelming, overlooked series where I take a look at some cards that I think are underplayed, that I think should see more play in their respective formats. This time we were tackling blue cards. Last time we went over white cards. If you want to watch that video, it should be in the same playlist as this video. And if you want to see when the next video comes out, it'll probably be on black cards. Then please subscribe and press the notification bell, and it'll let you know when it comes out. Anyways, let's get into some blue cards that I think are underplayed. First off, we're going with Fade Away. 2 and a blue for sorcery. For each creature, that creature's controller pays 1 mana or sacrifices a permanent. I really like this card against like token decks or against any deck that's going to play lots of creatures, because this forces them to tap out or just basically sacrifice their entire board. And if they have more creatures than they have mana, like if they're playing a Krenko deck or if they're playing any sort of token-based strategy, then this can just wipe their field of a lot of their tokens. Now, this is reminiscent of Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which has the same ability, but as a land. So this is a little worse than that, but a lot cheaper money-wise. And I like this as just a blue sorcery that does this. Against some decks, it won't really do much at all. Like if an opponent has like 2 or 3 creatures, this doesn't really do much, but against an opponent who is making a wide board, this can just cripple them. What you can also do with this is force your opponent to tap out their mana. So you can play this for 3 mana, and your opponents who are playing lots of creatures can either sacrifice their creatures, which is best case scenario, or, worst case scenario, they tap out their mana, and that might let you resolve a powerful blue spell like Expropriate or Sky, or what is it, the Shark Typhoon card. So yeah, this card seems pretty decent. It's very good against the token type decks or against decks that play lots of creatures. And I think that if you're looking for something to answer those types of decks, this is a decent option. Our next card is Teferi's Veil. 1 and a blue enchantment. Whenever any creature you control attacks, it phases out at end of combat. Now, why would you want this enchantment? Why would you want to do this? Well, simply speaking, this gives your creatures protections from rafts and any sorcery speed removal. So whenever you attack with your creature, it's going to phase out at the end of combat, and it's going to phase back in during your turn. So what this means is during your opponent's turn, it's basically going to not exist. So any sort of Wrath of God, Damnation, any of those effects will not hurt your creatures because they will be phased out. So if you're playing a blue aggro deck or a blue tribal deck like Merfolk, and you don't want to get blown out by a Wrath, then Teferi's Veil is like a perfect card, because you play Teferi's Veil, you attack of your creatures, now they phase out, and now basically, if your opponent has a Wrath spell, well, they're phased out. They're not going to get destroyed. Or if your opponent has sorcery speed removal, they're not going to be able to be targeted. So this is a really good card if your opponents are playing lots of sorcery speed removal or Wraths, and you're playing a blue creature-based deck, which, I mean, there's actually quite a bit of those, like Merfolk, or there's also a lot of decks that splash blue that play lots of creatures. If your commander is an Esper commander and you're playing an Esper tokens deck or an Esper artifacts deck with lots of creatures, and this will fit really well in it if you don't want your creatures dying. So yeah, that's Teferi's Veil is pretty strong board wipe protection. I like this card a lot, and I'm probably going to put it in my Merfolk deck now that I'm thinking about it. Card number 3, definitely underplayed, and it's really powerful in a lot of different situations. It's Keep Watch, 2 and a blue, instant, draw a card for each attacking creature. Now, this is like an insane card in Commander. First of all, if you're playing a deck of lots of creatures like Merfolk, if you're playing a deck that Teferi's Veil would be in, like Merfolk, or any sort of tokens deck, or any sort of deck that plays lots of creatures, then Keep Watch goes perfectly in that deck because now you attack with all your merfolks, you attack with all your creatures, you play Keep Watch and draw a card for each creature you control that's attacking. So if you attack with 5 or 6 creatures, this is 3 mana instant, draw 6 cards, which is insane. But not only can you attack to trigger this, but it's just attacking creature. So let's say an opponent has lots of creatures and they're attacking one of your other opponents, or maybe they're attacking you. Then this Keep Watch against like a opposing tokens deck or an opposing tribal deck can draw you, 4 or 5 cards if they're attacking with 4 or 5 tokens, worst case scenario. Best case scenario, if they're swinging out at your opponent with like 10 creatures, and you just play this, draw 10 cards off of basically someone attacking your opponent, that's a really good situation for you. Yeah, and this card gets really a lot better in EDH than it is in other formats because there's 4 players, so you don't have to be the one doing the attacking and you don't have to be the one being attacked. So if you're just sitting back playing some sort of like blue control based strategy and your opponent attacks another one of your opponent with like 5 or 6 creatures, you can go ahead and play this, draw 6 cards at instant speed for 3 mana, which is insane. And yeah, this is a really great card for Commander, and really, I think a card that almost every blue deck should play. If you're playing a creature deck, you should definitely play this because you're going to be attacking with creatures. If you're playing a more control deck, well, opponents are going to be attacking with creatures, so it's going to be good for you there anyway. So yeah, I think this card probably should see play in a lot more decks. Next is Mirrormade from Throne of Eldraine, 1 blue enchantment. You may have Mirrormade enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So this is really good if you're playing like an Enchantress deck or if you're playing a deck with a lot of artifacts. I know in my Enchantress deck, I have this in it as just a way to copy whatever the best enchantment on the field I have is. If I have a Solitary Confinement on the field, I'll just copy it with this. If I have a Sigil of the God Throne, I'll just copy it with this, So it's really versatile because it's basically another copy of whatever the best artifact or enchantment on the battlefield is. And it doesn't even have to be one you control. It can be one that your opponent controls. You just get 3 mana and it's a copy of whatever the best one on the battlefield. So one thing I do like about this card though, being 3 mana, the other 3 mana, there's Copy Enchantment and then there's Sculpting Steel. And Copy Enchantment and Sculpting Steel do something similar, but Copy Enchantment only copies enchantments, so that's the name, and then Sculpting Steel only copies artifacts, while Mirrormade copies both artifacts and enchantments. So I really like that side of this card. The fact that it's versatile, that it's either the best enchantment or the best artifact on the battlefield for 3 mana, that's pretty good. And if you're playing an Enchantress or a artifact-centric deck, then you should definitely play Mirrormade in that list. The next card I want to talk about is Polymorphist Jest. 1 blue instant. Until end of turn, each creature target player controls loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. Now, one thing I really like about this card is that it's a great combat trick. So if you're playing a deck with a decent amount of creatures or a few creatures, right, and then your opponent swings out with all their massive creatures, you can play Polymorph's Jest, turn all of their massive creatures into 1/1 and then just eat them up with your slightly larger creatures, right? So I like that effect of this card. I like that you can use this if an opponent is attacking another opponent. You can use Polymorph's Jest to basically choose winners in that combat and gain a political advantage, right? So let's say your opponent A is attacking opponent B, and you want opponent A to not attack you, or you want opponent A to give you some sort of benefit, then maybe you turn opponent B's creatures onto 1/1 so opponent A just blows them out in combat, right? Or maybe opponent B has a threatening board, right? And they block, and now, oh, Polymorph's Jest, they're all 1/1s. Now your threatening board is no more. So I like this card as just a great combat trick because of that. And it also synergizes really well with some other types of cards. So cards like Electrickery or End the Festivities, which deal 1 damage to each creature your opponent's control. I know Electrickery does it for 1 and a red, and End the Festivities does it for 1 red. You can use this to turn all of your opponent's creatures into 1/1s. and then Infestivities or Electricity Overload and just deal 1 damage to them all. It's sort of like a build your own board wipe in like blue-red. I think that's really cool. But yeah, this card, a great combat trick and can be used well with other cards to just sort of build your own board wipe. And of course, you know, this can basically also be a fog too. If your opponent is attacking you with giant creatures, even if you don't have any creatures, you can just turn them all into 1/1s for a turn. And now, you know, maybe instead of taking lethal, you're maybe taking 4 or 5. So that's pretty good. I like this card a lot. I would say probably play this in like a deck where your opponent, or a deck where you have lots of creatures so that you can block your opponent's 1/1s and just blow them out in combat. I think that's the best strategy for playing this card. Although in a control deck, it does work decently well too. Next is a card I really like because it has a lot of mind games to it, and it's Sphinx Ambassador, 5 blue. Flying, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for a card, and that player names a card. If you search for a creature card that isn't the named card, you may put it on the battlefield under your control. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So this is 7 mana. It's a 5/5 with flying. It's not the best. It's not the best. It doesn't do anything when it comes in. And in order to get the effect of it, you have to have it survive a whole turn cycle, which is hard. But when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to do something really cool. You get to search your opponent's library, so you get to see whatever they're playing. But also, you get to potentially steal one of their creatures. But however, you have to steal the one that they're not guessing. So it really is interesting mind games. Like, do you steal the most powerful creature in their deck? I don't know about that. Maybe not, because they're probably going to name that, right? So do you steal the second most powerful creature in their deck? What if they're on to that strategy of you purposely choosing a lesser powerful creature, and they name it, and you don't get anything? So there's a little bit of a mind game where you have to basically outluck your opponent and name something that they're not going to name. You know, obviously, if you just get a random creature from their deck, they're probably not going to name it, but you want to get the best creature from their deck. But if you get the best creature from their deck, then they probably are going to name it. So it's a really interesting card. And of course, you can just lie to your opponent and just tell them, hey, when I hit you with this, I'm going to get this certain card. And then see what they do when you search their deck. You know what I mean? So that's really interesting too. I like the whole mind games this creates. Is it really that powerful? No. But is it cool? I think so. And the fact that you can just potentially steal the best creature out of your opponent's deck is really powerful and really cool. And I like that. Speaking of stealing creatures, we have Thalakos Deceiver, 3 and a blue for a 1/1 with Shadow. Shadow being it can block and only be blocked by creatures of shadow, so this is never going to be blocked unless your opponent has a Dalthy Voidwalker. And mono black decks might have a Dalthy Voidwalker, so they could block it with that. But outside of that, there's nothing that's going to be blocking this reasonably. And you sacrifice it, gain control of target creature. Use this ability only if Thalakos Deceiver is attacking unblocked. So it has the same problem that Sphinx has, where you have to survive a whole turn cycle, but it's only 4 mana. And there's ways to abuse this because it's a creature, right? So you attack with it, you sacrifice it, gain control of a creature, right? Okay, that's cool. But is that really that much better than control magic? Well, I would say so, because control magic is an enchantment that can be removed, and this is a permanent effect. But is it really that much better than it? No, not on face value, but it's a creature, so you can abuse it in ways that you can't with control magic. We already talked about control magic being an enchantment that can be removed, but also Thalakos Deceiver is a creature, which means it can be reanimated. It can be brought back from your graveyard to your hand with a lot of spells. There's a lot of spells that do that. It can be replayed with Muldrotha. There's a lot of things that allow you to replay creatures or reanimate creatures. And if you're able to just reanimate Thalakos Deceiver, and then it survives another turn, and then you attack with it, and you can steal another creature. That's something you can't do with control magic. The fact that this is a creature gives it utility that control magic doesn't have, because there are ways to recast it from your graveyard. And I think that's cool. I think that's cool. And maybe it's not that powerful because it is a 1/1 that dies to everything and has to survive a whole turn cycle, and everyone will want to target it, but it's still a pretty interesting card, and I do personally like cards like this. It's like control magic, but on a creature, and because it's on a creature, there's ways to abuse it that you can't with control magic, which I personally like. Anyways, that's this card. I would suggest playing it in a deck that cares about bringing creatures back from the graveyard or casting creatures. Like, I feel like this in Muldrotha would be a great card because you can just recast it from your graveyard every turn, and you can just steal all your opponent's best creatures. Or any sort of other deck that allows you to recast creatures from your graveyard, or in combination with like reanimation spells or cards like Raise Dead. So, you know, I like this card in decks like that. Next is a land equilibrium, and this is mono blue land destruction. Well, not land destruction, but mana hate. So it says if an opponent who controls at least as many lands as you do would put a land onto the battlefield, that player instead puts that land onto the battlefield and sacrifices a land. So this basically makes it so that no opponent can control more lands than you. So this really punishes opponents who ramp with ramp spells like Nature's Lore, like Rampant Growth, or Cultivate. So if your opponent's playing like a mono green deck and they're getting lands out of their deck, this really, really punishes them because now, well, they can only play as many lands as you can, right? And their whole ramp strategy is to get lands on the battlefield. Your ramp strategy with this card probably isn't going to do that. So you can abuse this by playing a lot of artifact ramp, like with signets or soul rings. So you play your soul rings or your signets or your worn power stones, right? And now your ramp is in your artifacts, while your opponent's ramp, if they're playing a green deck, is likely going to be with their lands. So now you stop them from playing their lands, so you basically stop them from ramping, and then you're still able to ramp with your artifacts. And that's, of course, breaking the synergy of this card. And that's why I think I like it, because you can really punish players who play mono green ramp spells that get lands into play, you know? You could also do this in sort of a way to decrease the amount of lands in play. If you play like a lot of artifact ramp and you just purposely don't play as many lands, you can basically stop your opponents from being able to get to their amount of mana to cast their spells. So yeah, this is a meme card, but it can work well in conjunction with other meme cards, and I like punishing the green ramp players. I don't know, I just like punishing them, and this is a card that punishes them. So yeah, well, we like this. Next is an older card. It's Reconstruction, and it's 1 blue, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand at sorcery speed. If you're playing a deck with lots of artifacts, you could just pay 1 blue mana, return whatever the best artifact card that died from your graveyard to your hand. Pretty simple. Pretty simple, pretty easy, pretty just generically good. It's 1 mana. Get whatever the best artifact is from your graveyard back into your hand. You know, your artifacts die from like a Bane of Progress or a Fracturing Gust. Well, now you have a way to get the best one back. Or maybe, you know, you have ways that mill over your own deck, like Emery or Goblin Engineer, where they mill cards over into your graveyard. Reconstruction can help you get whatever you milled over back into your hand and basically give you card advantage that way. So yeah, Reconstruction, very just simply, it's a simple card. I don't really have much to say about it, but it's a strong card. Regrowth is 2 mana, but it gives anything, but that's in green, and this is in blue, and I don't really know if there's that many good blue effects that get artifact cards, or really get cards in general back to your hand in blue. So this is going to be very good in an artifact deck, obviously. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about it, just a generically good card. Next is a card that I have. People were talking about this card a lot when it released, but I haven't really seen it that much, and it also goes into an artifact deck. It's the Reality Chip, and it's an equipment jellyfish for 1 and a blue. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and as long as it's attached to the creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. So basically, if you're playing a deck You don't have to be playing a lot of artifacts in your deck. This is just good in an artifact deck. It's good in a lot of decks because this allows you, once it's equipped, to just cast spells and play lands from the top of your library. It doesn't matter what it is. It's not like Mystic Forge where they have to be colorless. This lets you just cast spells and play lands from the top of your library, basically letting you play with the top of your library, and it gives you card advantage. I mean, Future Sight's a card that does something similar, but it's 5 mana, just straight up. Well, this is 2 mana to play it and 3 mana to reconfigure, so it is 5 mana, but that's divided among different turns, and you have to have another creature, but it's a lot cheaper because it's divided amongst turns. Than Future Sight, and the ability is just really powerful. I mean, being able to play lands and cast spells from the top of your library is just such a good effect because it just basically gives you an extra card. And then, of course, if you're able to cast whatever the top spell of your library is, well, there's another card under it that you get to cast or that you get to play. And I think that's really cool. If you have ways to manipulate whatever the top card of your library is, like with Sensei's Divining Top, or cards like Preordain or Ponder, this gets a lot better. And then also, there's another thing about this card I like is that you may look at them. They're not revealed. You get to look at them. So if there's a counterspell on top of your deck, with cards like Future Sight, everyone would know about it. But with Reality Chip, only you know about it. So you can just trick people with a counterspell that's on top of your deck, which I really like. I think this card is sweet. And if you're playing any type of deck that cares, I mean, this should be in like a lot of different blue decks, right? I mean, like, there's no downside to playing it. It's really cheap, and the extra card draw is really good. And especially you should be playing it if you're playing an artifact deck, because you can search it with Enlightened Tutor, you can search it with Stoneforge Mystic or Stonehewer Giant, which makes it really cool. And also, a lot of those artifact decks, they have ways to reduce the cost of Reality Chip or reduce the cost of Reconfigure to make it a really cheap Future Sight instead of just a slightly discounted one, which it already is. So yeah, I like this card a lot, and I think it should see a more play. And I just think it's generically good. It's not even specifically like, you don't even have to play it in an artifact deck. You just be playing it in a mono blue control deck as long as you have a creature to equip it to. And yeah, that's your commander. You always have your commander, so you can always equip this to your commander or to another creature that you have. So yeah, it's just a generically good card. So anyways, today we talked about some overlooked blue cards. We talked about Fade Away, pretty good sweeper. Really good against token decks or like decks that make a lot of creatures. Not so good against decks that don't have many creatures. Teferi's Veil, really good at protecting your own creatures from board wipes because phasing out makes it say don't exist during your opponent's turn. Keep Watch is an insane draw spell if you're playing lots of creatures in your deck, or, you know, if your meta is heavy in creatures, you could just do a 3 mana draw 6. It's really good. Mirrormade is the best version of that card I think that exists. Maybe Phyrexian Metamorph is better, but I think Mirrormade's definitely a strong card. Polymorph's Jest is a really cool combat trick and can really blow people out. Sphinx Ambassador is a really cool mind game card. Thalakos Deceiver lets you steal creatures, but because it's a creature itself, you can do tricks where you recast it from your graveyard or reanimate it and then get other opportunities to use it again. Land Equilibrium is just a really mean stacks card that I like because it punishes those green players from putting their lands into play. Reconstruction is a generically good blue card in an artifact deck, and then Reality Chip's just a generically good blue card that probably doesn't see enough play. So yeah, these are these cards. If you like this video, make sure you press the like button. Let me know what you think about these cards below in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.